The summer of 1944 arrived like thunder across the Pacific, and with it came a reckoning that would reshape the entire war. For over 2 brutal years, American forces had clawed their way westward, island by bloody island, reef by treacherous reef, from the hell of Guadalcanal to the scattered Marshalls. Each victory purchased with courage and blood, each step drawing the noose tighter around Japan's throat. But now everything was about to change. For the first time, American commanders prepared to shatter what Tokyo called the inner defense line, a chain of fortress islands that stood as Japan's final shield. Lose these, and the homeland itself would lie exposed and vulnerable. At the heart of this defensive barrier sat a tiny speck of coral and volcanic rock, barely 20 kilometers long, less than 10 wide. Its name? Saipan. To most, it seemed insignificant, just another dot on the endless Pacific map. But military strategists saw something else entirely. They saw the key that could unlock Japan's defeat. You see, Japan possessed something that changed everything. Location. Capture this island. And America's new B-29 Superfortress bombers, these massive 4-engine monsters, could suddenly reach Tokyo itself. From Saipan's airstrips, fire could rain directly onto Japan's cities, its factories, its heart. To Tokyo's military leaders, Saipan was their shield. To Washington's war planners, it was the dagger aimed straight at victory. The question wasn't whether a battle would come, but how terrible it would be when it did. In May 1944, Admiral Raymond Spruance assembled the most powerful invasion force the Pacific had ever witnessed. His Fifth Fleet gathered like a steel storm, over 500 warships converging from across the ocean, carriers whose decks bristled with fighters, battleships whose guns could level mountains, cruisers, destroyers, and massive transports carrying the finest fighting men America could field. The 2nd Marine Division, hardened veterans who'd survived hell before. The 4th Marine Division, eager to prove themselves. The Army's 27th Infantry Division, ready to write their own chapter in this war. Together, more than 127,000 men prepared to storm Saipan's beaches. Waiting for them were 32,000 Japanese soldiers. The 31st Army under Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito, men who believed surrender was worse than death. Supported by thousands of naval troops, they'd transformed Saipan into something nightmarish. Tokyo understood what losing Saipan would mean. Prime Minister Hideki Tojo himself warned darkly that its fall would place the Emperor, the living god of Japan, in mortal danger. Reinforcements were ordered immediately, but American submarines and aircraft had already sealed the island off from help. Saipan would stand alone, or fall alone, and so the Japanese defenders dug in, literally. They carved miles of tunnels through volcanic rock, honeycombing the island with hidden bunkers and firing positions. Artillery pieces were camouflaged among cliffs where they couldn't be seen from above. Every beach where Americans might land was seeded with mines, every approach covered by interlocking fields of fire. Japanese high command convinced themselves this would be the decisive battle. The moment when America's advance would finally, catastrophically, stop. They were about to learn how wrong they were. June 13th, 1944 dawned clear and bright, then became apocalyptic. From the decks of 15 massive battleships and 11 heavy cruisers, over 300 naval guns erupted simultaneously. The bombardment that followed was unlike anything the Pacific War had witnessed before. For 2 solid days, 48 hours without pause, shells the size of automobiles screamed down onto Saipan. Fortifications simply disappeared. Fuel dumps exploded into towers of flame that could be seen for miles. Black smoke columns climbed into the sky like funeral pyres for what was about to die on this island. The thunder of guns became constant, relentless, maddening. Offshore carrier aircraft from Admiral Mark Mitch's Task Force 58 joined the symphony of destruction, strafing gun positions, destroying Japanese planes before they could even take off. Inside their underground bunkers, Japanese soldiers endured in darkness, many praying, some writing final letters, all wondering if anything could survive what was happening above. When dawn broke on June 15th, the Marines discovered a brutal truth. The bombardment had looked devastating, but many defenders had simply gone underground, waiting. And now, as landing craft approached the beaches, they emerged. At exactly 8:30 a.m., the first wave of Marines roared toward the southwestern shore near Charan Canoa. The sea was strangely calm, the horizon streaked with smoke and flame. Then the ramps dropped, and hell erupted. Machine guns opened up from concealed positions, cutting down men before they could even reach the sand. Amphibious tractors burst into fireballs. Bodies floated among the coral. The water turned red. But Marines don't retreat. More waves followed, using burning wrecks as cover. Engineers blasting paths through minefields with Bangalore torpedoes. By midday, a foothold had been carved into Saipan, paid for with hundreds of American lives. But they were ashore, and that changed everything. Inland, the terrain became a waking nightmare. Sugarcane fields where snipers could hide 3 feet away. Ravines that concealed entire bunker complexes. Dense jungle that swallowed men whole. Every yard forward was contested, every position paid for in blood. When darkness fell, Japanese infiltrators slipped like ghosts into American lines, hurling grenades, attacking command posts, creating chaos. The battle for Saipan had truly begun. For 3 days straight, the fighting along those beaches and through those sugar fields never stopped. The heat was crushing, suffocating in the humidity. The air reeked of cordite smoke, of burning fuel and of death. Japanese defenders fought from caves with suicidal determination, firing at point-blank range before detonating grenades rather than surrendering. American tanks found themselves ambushed by hidden anti-tank guns, or by soldiers who simply threw themselves beneath the treads with explosive charges. Progress was measured in meters, not miles. On June 17th, the Army's 27th Infantry Division splashed ashore to reinforce the exhausted Marines. The advance continued, slow, grinding, relentless. Each hill had to be taken. Each cave system cleared, one by one. In the north, Marines finally captured Aslito Airfield, soon renamed Islay Field. Engineers immediately began repairing runways, even as fighting raged nearby. Within days, American F-4U Corsairs and Avenger bombers were flying from Saipan itself, providing close air support, blasting enemy positions that artillery couldn't reach. The Japanese fought with a fanaticism that shocked even hardened veterans. Night after night, they launched suicidal counterattacks, screaming, charging, dying. On June 20th, General Saito ordered a massive coordinated assault near Garapan. Over 40 tanks from the 9th Tank Regiment charged through the darkness, headlights blazing in a display of desperate courage. It was one of the largest Japanese armored attacks of the entire Pacific War. It was also annihilated. American anti-tank guns and naval gunfire turned the battlefield into an inferno. By dawn, nearly every Japanese tank was a smoking ruin, their crews dead inside. That same week, far to the west across open ocean, Japan's Imperial Navy made one final desperate attempt to save Saipan. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa launched the combined fleet from the Philippines. 9 carriers, 5 battleships, hundreds of aircraft. Everything Japan had left, but American carrier groups were waiting. What followed became known as the Battle of the Philippine Sea. And for Japanese naval aviation, it was the end. Over June 19th and 20th, American pilots tore through Japanese formations with devastating efficiency. U.S. pilots called it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. And the name fit. More than 350 Japanese planes were shot down, for the loss of just 30 American aircraft. When Ozawa's battered carriers fled westward, they took Saipan's last hope with them. General Saito received the news in grim silence. No help was coming. No rescue fleet would appear on the horizon. He gathered his officers and spoke words they would remember until death. "We will fight to the last man. Heaven will bless us for having been obedient to our orders. From that moment, Saipan became a fight to the death. Nothing less. The Americans pressed northward methodically, clearing the central plateau, taking coastal towns one by one. Japanese resistance hardened around Mount Tapochau, the highest point on the island. From its slopes, artillery observers could direct fire onto the beaches below, making it invaluable. On June 23rd, Marines assaulted the mountain under blistering fire. The climb was steep, the enemy invisible until the last heartbeat. But by afternoon, the summit belonged to America. From up there, you could see the entire island, a landscape of ruin, smoke, shattered palms, and the glittering ocean beyond. As the battle dragged into early July, Japanese morale finally began to crack. Food was gone. Water nearly gone, ammunition critically low. General Saito himself had been wounded, yet surrender? Unthinkable. Japanese soldiers had been taught that capture meant dishonor, worse than death. Civilians had been told through relentless propaganda that Americans would torture and murder them. The enemy had been dehumanized so completely that suicide seemed honorable by comparison. On July 6th, Saito issued his final order. All remaining troops, roughly 3,000 soldiers, plus thousands of sailors and laborers, would make one last attack, one final charge into history. "We will advance to attack the enemy," he wrote in beautiful calligraphy, "and die an honorable death. May Japan exist for 10,000 years." That night he and Admiral Nagumo, commander of the naval garrison, committed ritual suicide in the traditional manner. Their war was over. But for thousands of their men, the dying had just begun. The following morning brought what would become the largest banzai charge of the entire Pacific War. Before dawn on July 7th, the hills above Tanapag erupted with a sound that would haunt survivors forever. Tenoheika Banzai. Long live the Emperor! Thousands of Japanese soldiers surged forward like a human tsunami, many armed only with bayonets, swords, sharpened bamboo, whatever they could find. They swept through the lines of the U.S. 27th Division, overrunning outposts, fighting hand-to-hand in the darkness. It was chaos and horror beyond description. Screams, gunfire, the flash of grenades, the clash of steel, men dying in ways that should never be. But the charge couldn't break through. By mid-morning, American machine guns and artillery had cut down nearly all of them. The ground was littered with over 4,000 Japanese dead. When the guns finally fell silent, Marines walked through the carnage in stunned shock. They'd faced mass charges before, but never anything on this scale. It was like mowing down grass, one recalled years later, his voice still haunted. They just kept coming. In the aftermath, resistance continued only in isolated pockets. Soldiers hiding in caves, firing until their ammunition ran out. American engineers used flamethrowers and explosives to clear them, sealing tunnels when defenders refused to emerge. But what followed was even more tragic, heartbreaking in ways combat itself could never be. As U.S. troops advanced north toward Marpi Point, hundreds of Japanese civilians, men, women, children, fled before them in terror. Propaganda had convinced them that Americans would commit unspeakable atrocities. Now trapped on cliffs above the sea, they made an unthinkable choice. Soldiers handed grenades to families. Parents held children close. And then they jumped. Those cliffs became known as Suicide Cliff and Banzai Cliff, monuments to the absolute madness of a war that had transformed civilians into martyrs. The sight of mothers clutching infants as they leapt would haunt American troops for the rest of their lives. By July 9th, the battle was officially declared over. Of the 32,000 Japanese soldiers who defended Saipan, fewer than 1,000 were taken prisoner. The rest were dead. American casualties were also severe, nearly 3,500 killed, more than 13,000 wounded. But the victory was total and complete. The United States now controlled the Marianas, and with them, the ability to strike Japan itself. Within weeks, Seabees and Army engineers transformed Saipan into a massive airbase. Long concrete runways stretched across what had been sugar fields. Hangars rose where battles had raged. Supply depots sprawled where men had died. By November 1944, the first Boeing B-29s of the 20th Air Force began flying missions from Saipan and neighboring Tinian. Their target? Tokyo, the massive firebombing campaign that would devastate Japan's cities, and ultimately the atomic missions that would end the war. All traced their path back to these islands captured at such terrible cost. For Japan, Saipan's fall was absolutely catastrophic. News of the defeat reached Tokyo on July 18th, triggering a political earthquake. Prime Minister Tojo resigned in disgrace, his cabinet collapsing under the weight of failure. The loss of Saipan destroyed any remaining illusion that this war could be won. The Imperial General Staff knew the truth now. The homeland was within range of American bombers. The Navy was effectively finished. The defensive perimeter had been shattered beyond repair. Emperor Hirohito himself reportedly murmured in his characteristic understatement. The war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage, yet surrender remained impossible. The code of Bushido demanded endurance, sacrifice, death before dishonor, as Japan prepared to defend its remaining islands, Guam, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Saipan became a grim symbol of what awaited both sides. For the Americans, the battle was both victory and revelation. It demonstrated the absolute futility of expecting Japan to surrender through conventional warfare alone. If 30,000 defenders could fight to the death on a small island, how many millions would die defending the home islands themselves? That question would shape the next year of the war. From the relentless firebombing campaign to the invasion planning for Operation Downfall, to the eventual decision to use atomic weapons at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. When the guns finally fell silent over Saipan, the island was a graveyard unlike any other. Beaches that had glowed with tracer fire now lay littered with rusting landing craft and the hulks of burned tanks. Sugarcane fields were strewn with helmets and rifles and the personal effects of the dead. The air still hung heavy with the stench of decay. In the north at the cliffs, flowers floated on the water where thousands had leapt to their deaths. The Marines built cemeteries with neat white crosses. The Japanese burned incense over the ashes of their dead. Years later, decades later, survivors from both sides would return. They would stand at those cliffs, old men now. And remember, the cliffs are still there today. The wind still blows strong. The sea still breaks endlessly below. Plaques mark the sites where so many died, soldiers and civilians alike. Caught between duty and despair, between honor and horror. The Battle of Saipan was not the longest battle of the Pacific War. It wasn't the largest, but it was among the most consequential. Its outcome reshaped the entire conflict in ways that echoed for generations. It marked the breaking point for Japan, militarily, politically, and psychologically. From that moment on, defeat was inevitable. Only the manner of its arrival, and the terrible cost in human lives, remained to be decided. For the men who fought there, Saipan embodied everything the Pacific War had become. The courage and the horror, the triumph and the tragedy, the terrible arithmetic of an empire's fall. It was the place where two worlds collided with devastating force. And neither emerged unchanged, and in the clear eyes of history, it was the moment when Japan's empire began its final death spiral. When the shadow of its destruction fell across the horizon, and the path to August 1945 became irreversible, the battle was over. But its consequences would echo across time, shaping nations, haunting memories, and reminding future generations of the absolute cost of war fought to its ultimate terrible conclusion.